one thing I have to remind everybody is this church is a bivocational church. So most of my income comes from a consulting business I have here in the States, in the UK, and in Ireland. And so I went through a time where my father was terminally ill, and I was caring for him for about 16 months, and my business went really downhill. I spoke at the Tennessee Dental Association's annual meeting here in Nashville a few years ago. Absolutely the worst presentation I ever gave. I was driving home thinking it couldn't get any worse than this. I was actually looking for another job maybe. And I ran across the fact that day, I call it just out of the heavenly blue, that Ken Blanchard had started this organization called Lead Like Jesus. And it happened to be only a few miles from my house. So I went, I got the book, I really devoured the book. It was just awesome stuff. I got a facilitator toolkit so I could begin to teach my people those things. If you'd asked me up until that time if I was leading like Jesus, I think I would have said, well, yeah, I'm doing pretty good at that. I'm giving it my best shot. I wouldn't have seen myself as a failure. But as I began to really dig into what it meant to lead like Jesus and what his example of servant leadership was, I saw just how far I was failing and how bad I was doing. I attended the Society of Church Consulting's training just right after that. And I had noticed when I consult mainly with dentists that if the dentist doesn't get it, the rest of the team don't get it. And so I had to begin to think about what was happening at church and realize that if the team wasn't getting it, it was because the dentist or the pastor wasn't getting it. I had to realize that there was some work that needed to be done in my own heart first before this church could really begin a process of turning around. You know, I couldn't blame the declining population in the community. We don't have a mailbox or a telephone at the church, okay? How many of you pastor a church without a mailbox or a telephone, you know? This is a very declining population rural area. I couldn't blame the economy. I couldn't blame the population. I couldn't blame the deacons. I couldn't blame the heritage of the church. I couldn't blame anything but myself. If folks aren't following, we're not leading. And I had to come to that really hard conclusion that folks, there was no one really following. There were 2 or 3 here or there, but they weren't following. And I had to admit that I wasn't leading. So I'm glad that Tammy kind of introduced this pride and fear thing for us because it's huge. I had to alter my ego. Now, when I say alter, it's not A-L-T-E-R. It's A-L-T-A-R. I had to put my ego up on the altar as a living sacrifice. And you know, the problem with living sacrifices is you put them up on the altar, but they always want to crawl off, right? So it wasn't an easy process, and I slipped sometimes along the way. But as I began to change, folks began to notice. They began to ask some questions. And I began to interpret it for them and let them know that I was dealing with my own issues of pride and fear. And then folks went from asking questions about what was going on to actually talking up what was happening. And there began to be just a new sense. I organized a leadership encounter for about 20 folks in my church. We followed that up with a 6-week study to kind of get this into the fabric of people's thinking.